Darling, you send me, I know you send me.
Hello friends and family, welcome back to my channel. This is honestly an improvement for me because it has only been like a month and then I filmed again. It's not a huge improvement, but it's something. So as you can see, I'm in a new filming place again. I'm still kind of experimenting and jiggling where I should be filming. And as you can see, we have some Lunar New Year flowers over here. That is very, very beautiful. Kind of matches my top. Or I matched it. And then I also have some books back here that is just for decor. This entire table is basically empty, except for this little section right here. And I might be talking a bit funny because I had my wisdom surgery the other day. And it's a little bit sore. So let's dive into today's video because I have quite a lot to talk about. So in the month of January, I read 8 books. So I'm gonna kind of talk to you guys. I'm not gonna kind of, I'm gonna actually talk to you guys about the books. So let me know what you guys think about book videos. It's something that I've been loving for a long time. I'm also an English major. So it's something that I really, really enjoy doing, reading. So let me know if you enjoy these reading videos. I don't think it's the only thing I'm gonna do on my channel, but it's something that I'm gonna be doing quite a lot of on my channel. Okay, so the first book I read is The Vanishing Half. This is actually a reread. I did read it in July, I believe, or maybe August of 2020. And I loved it, so I wanted to read it again because I was also gonna read Mothers, which I'll talk about, and I kind of wanted like a Brit Bennett refresher. So when I read this in July or August, this was already a 5 out of 5, so again it is a 5 out of 5 for me. So this book spans from, I believe, 1950s to around the late 90s, and it focuses on the 2 twin sisters, Stella and Desiree, and also eventually their family and their children. So it's kind of multi-generational, sort of. Well, I guess you get, yeah, no, it is multi-generational. You get their great-grandparents, or was it their great-great-grandpa, I believe. So he built this town named Mallard, and he wanted this town that was, it's a historically black town, but they do favor light skin, so it's kind of like the intermixing. And Stella and Desiree, as twins, they kind of pass off as white because they're so light-skinned already. Like there's a part where Stella goes into a museum and people believe that she's white. Then eventually the twins grow up and they leave Mallard and then they go their separate ways. There's a reason why they go for their separate ways, but I don't want to spoil it for you guys. But essentially one marries a black man, one marries a white man, and then one lives as a black person, one lives as a white person. And it's not really just the twins struggling with their identity, it's also their children, their families that kind of have this uncertainty about their identities. So yeah, so we see how the twins' decisions kind of impact their children, impacts their families, and it's a very beautifully told multi-generational story, mainly focused on identity and race. So highly, highly recommend this one. 5 out of 5, even though through the reread, I kind of knew what was coming, but it was still a 5 out of 5. So the next book I read is this thick one, The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. This is not my first V.E. Schwab book. I do love V.E. Schwab a lot, or Victoria Schwab for her YA books. I love V.E. Schwab. I think she's a very, very good writer. There hasn't been a single thing that I read from her so far that I didn't enjoy. So this is one of my favorite books this month. It was a 4 out of 5 for me. And I'll explain why it isn't a 5 out of 5, but let me kind of tell you a little bit about it first. So Addie makes a deal with the devil, and the deal is that she can live for this very, very long time because she worries that she won't do everything that she wants to in her life. So the devil grants her, or I say devil, but like I'm not really sure if he's a devil, but like just kind of that characteristic. So she ends up living for a very, very long time, but the catch, or the wrinkle is that every time she meets somebody and that person so much as turns around or leaves the room, they forget her. So she is forgetful. She can never leave a mark. She can't write anything, she can't paint anything, but she has found very interesting ways to sort of leave a mark over the 300 years that she's lived, and nobody remembers her until she meets someone at a bookstore in New York City. So I gave this a 4 out of 5 instead of a 5 out of 5, only because I did love the story. I think it was a beautiful story and like so well written, but because we see her through 300 years, we see her through a lot of historical events. I don't want to call this a historical fiction, but it feels like one a little bit. But we see her through a lot of historical events, like we see her through wars and famine and a lot of different things, but it's only in Europe. Like, she really does only stay within Europe. I mean, she does go to the US eventually, but she really does just stay within Europe. And I find it a little bit hard to believe that in 300 years she didn't decide to travel anywhere else, even though her goal was to see the world. So I was a bit surprised about that. And we do get this chapter where she is in the South during the civil rights movement. So I was a bit surprised that like she sort of stayed, or there wasn't anything mentioned about it. But I guess this is just something super minor because it isn't really the focus of the story, but it would have been a bit interesting to see these elements in the story. But still, it was a very, very well written book. So yeah, would have been a 5 out of 5, but kind of a 4 out of 5 because a few things didn't stick to me. And then the next book I read is Mothers, or The Mothers by Brit Bennett, another Brit Bennett novel. So we follow a character called Nadia Turner, or it begins with a character called Nadia Turner. And she's 17 and she ends up getting with their local church's pastor's son, Luke. And there ends up being this like little boo-boo on the road that they need to cover up. So yeah, Nadia and Luke covers up the secret, and we see how this secret goes with them along their, I think this book is around like 10-ish years of their life, or maybe even more. And then Nadia ends up meeting Aubrey, and Aubrey ends up meeting Luke, and there's this kind of love triangle, for lack of a better term. I don't think it's a love triangle, but it's kind of like a relationship triangle that's a bit awkward. And then we see Nadia going off elsewhere, and we see how these three characters grow, and also what ends up happening with that secret and how that secret affects all three of their relationship. And this book, why it's called The Mothers, I was a bit confused about at first, but it's called The Mothers because this story is basically told from the perspective of the upper room. So it's the upper room is their local church, and it's told from the perspective of the women in the upper room, and they're called the mothers. So they kind of watch these three characters grow up and how their relationship with the church is like. And it's not necessarily religious, it's more like this church is quite influential, not in the worst ways. Like, it's definitely one that takes care of its community as well, but yeah, it's told from the perspective of these mothers. And I gave this 4 out of 5 because it was really good. Brit Bennett is really, really good at writing these characters. Every single character I have like an attachment to, and it's really, really well written. For kind of shortish book compared to The Vanishing Half, you really get attached to these characters. And usually I'm a bit like not too attached if it's a bit shorter, but I did. It wasn't very clear from the beginning that it was going to be told from the mother's perspective. Maybe it was just me, but I thought that got a little bit lost. But otherwise, it was still a very, very good read. Okay, and the next book I read is a romance. It is The Two Lives of Lydia Bird by Joe C. Silver. Good book. This little novel had me crying in the first 10 pages. I read this at Tobin's house because I was living with him for the past month because I had some renovation going on at my family's house. So I was just bawling my eyes out and hugging him. It is a very heartbreaking book. Even literally this much in, I was crying. So we start off with our protagonist, Lydia. Lydia's boyfriend dies, or her soulmate, because they're about to get married. And I don't think this is a spoiler because it happens in the first page. And kind of, yeah, they talk about it in the synopsis as well. So not a spoiler. So Freddie, her soulmate, dies on her birthday, and he dies because he goes and drives their best friend. So it's a car accident, and it is so heartbreaking. So that all happens in the first 3 pages. So this book shows how she deals with her grief over the course of 2 years. So in the beginning, she ends up being prescribed these sleeping pills because she has a hard time falling asleep, understandably. And so through these sleeping pills, she ends up living this alternative life where Freddie is still alive. This kind of reminds me a little bit of The Midnight Library, which is my favorite book. So I did really like this book in the beginning. And it's just heartbreaking because you see that she's so in love with Freddie, and Freddie in this life doesn't even know that he's dead, or doesn't know that in her root life that he's dead. We see how Lydia deals with the grief in this other world, but then also how she has to deal with it in real life. It's a very interesting way to deal with grief, and I think it's very, very well written. This was like a 3.5 stars for me, only because I felt like there were parts of the book where I just didn't really understand what she was doing, and I didn't really like how they handled Freddie. I didn't like how the author handled Freddie, but still a very good book. I did really enjoy it. It was a whirlwind of an experience. Just how they handled Freddie, I was a bit upset about, but I get it. I kind of get what she's trying to do, but I mean, I still recommend it. It was one of the better romances that I read this month. So the next book I read was an ebook. I'll put it right here. It is The Disappearing Moon Cafe by Sky Lee. This was a book that I read for class, and honestly, I'm so grateful that I had the experience to read it because it was a very, very beautiful book. One that is unlike other books that I've read that's similar to a book like this, if that makes sense. This class that I'm in is a migration literature course, mainly focused on Asian Canadians, Asian Americans. So it's a multi-generational story that follows a family's move from China, or migration from China to Vancouver. And this spans a very, very long time. It's from the 1890s all the way to, I believe, the early 90s. So quite a long period of time. And the secret author is actually the great-grandchild of this family, and her name is Kai, and she kind of tracks all the events that happened in the span of these like 100 or so years. It is a historical fiction, but it is focused mainly on this family. So she kind of tracks there's the racism, the exclusion, but also the exclusion not just from the greater Vancouver area or the greater Canadian ideals, but it is exclusion from the family, the Chinese community in Vancouver as well. There's power struggles, and there's how loyalties play out in the family as well. And why I say it's a little bit different compared to books like this is that there isn't really a lot of white people in the story. I mean, there's like, I think 1 or 2 or just a few, right? But it's not the focus. It's not really like how they dealt with this racism. There definitely is a little bit of internalized racism in some characters, but it really is focused on the community. And it's also more focused on the cultural practice, which I found really, really interesting because it kind of shows how obviously the Chinese Canadian community was a little bit more discreet in the beginning, but then it shows how these cultural practices becomes bigger, like how this minority or marginalized community uses the dominant cultures, uses materials from the dominant culture to carry out these practices. We also see how the previous generation's ideals affect the current generation and how it's kind of carried on. For example, the women's sexuality in Chinese cultures. We see Kai, so the writer of the story, how she reclaims her own sexuality, which is something that may have been taboo back in the day. Even though it was happening, it was just covered up or, you know, hidden. And I know a lot of people disliked this book because it does get a little bit confusing. It kind of jumps back and forth. It's kind of like This Is Us, the TV show. So it does jump back and forth between timelines, and it's a bit confusing with their names. And I don't mean they're like names, I mean as in their how Chinese people address their uncles, like how I have so many uncles, so there's like a different name for every uncle, a different name for every aunt. So I guess that's why the story got a bit confusing for some people. It did a bit for me too, because there was a lot of characters, but I had to draw out a family tree, and I found that helped a little bit. It's so good overall. It's not just this like different storytelling that I found interesting. It's not just like because of the different themes they explored in this novel, but it's also the story is just genuinely so damn good. Like there were so many jaw drops, there were so many things I wasn't expecting, a lot of drama, which I honestly live for, so so yeah, it was fantastic. I really enjoyed this novel and I highly recommend it. So I feel like we had a lot of high books, a lot of good books to start the month. The next book I read was an absolute shit show, and that is Jane Eyre. I honestly don't even know why I invested in this book. Like honestly, okay, I know. I invested in it because I had FOMO. Because I'm an English major and I was like, I feel like I need to read Jane Eyre to feel a sense of accomplishment in my life. And I was insecure about my identity, so then I read this book and I really regret it. I hated it so much. Honestly, this would have been a 1 star or a freaking 0 star for me, but like I gave it 2 because I do understand that it's about Jane more. I just didn't like a lot of the characters. Like even Jane, I was a little bit like about. So I'll give you a bit of a synopsis. I don't even want to talk about this book, but essentially we follow Jane. She grows up, was not from a loved family, well, was not from a loved step family. We see her grow up, see her mature into a woman, and we just follow her along. Hence the book's title, Jane Eyre, because it is about Jane Eyre. All right, so a lot of people I know love Mr. Rochester. He's this like beautiful gentleman, but I freaking hated him. Like he is like, I don't know why. I just don't know why Jane ends up back with him, okay? She leaves for a moment and then she gets back with him, which I'm just so utterly confused about, because if you read him, maybe it was not back then, okay? I get it. Maybe back then it was different, but like he just sounds abusive and like possessive over Jane, over freaking everything else basically. And then there's this character Bertha, all right, like, which is just fucked up. Like, have you ever disliked someone or disliked your significant other, wife, husband, whatever, person, and then decide to lock them up? I mean, I haven't heard of that unless you're like a serial killer. Like he sounds like Ted Bundy to me essentially, and I really disliked him. So I disliked the novel because a lot of it is focused on him, and I just like, he just sounds like this toxic ass person. And there's this part where Mr. Rochester basically dresses up as this like fortune teller that is a woman, but then nobody knows that it's him. Like I don't know, I just find it very hard to believe. Like so I didn't like this book, as you can tell. I really didn't. It would have been a 1. It honestly would have been. I just gave it 2 because Jane is okay, like, of a character. Actually, no, I'm sorry. As I'm like giving you my thoughts, it is a 1 star. I'm sorry. I'm trying to give it 2. I'm trying, but it's a 1. Like, it honestly is just a 1. So lesson learned, don't feel FOMO. If you don't like a damn book, don't continue to read it. Just give it up, donate it to charity, give it to someone else that you probably hate because it is a shit ass book. I heard there was another book, I think it's called The Wide Sargasso Sea, that is written in response to Jane Eyre, and I believe it's from Bertha's perspective, that I feel like I want to read, and hopefully it'll redeem my idea of Jane Eyre. Anyway, so yeah, that was the worst book that I read this month. Anyways, okay, so back onto a higher note. The next book I read is Call Me By Your Name. So in this book, we follow these 2 characters, Elio and Oliver. Oliver is a grad student from Columbia University, and he comes to visit Elio's family. And then I never really understood what it was, but I believe it's some sort of fellowship that Elio's family offers to grad students to write their books, to discuss philosophy and a lot of different smart things, essentially. Eventually, we see Elio discovering his sexuality and his feelings towards Oliver as well. The author's writing is genuinely so beautiful and so well written. It really made me feel like I was there. Like, it was very Italian summer-esque, and the way he was writing is how I would think about my past summer loves, if I had past summer loves, you know what I mean? I gave it 4 out of 5 because there was parts that I just like didn't love about Oliver. Especially this major part. He had this on and off thing with somebody else that ends up hurting Elio a bit in the end. Which I just find a bit shit that he never mentioned anything, because even though it was short, their time together, it did feel very... Sorry, I have a lot of saliva because my wisdom tooth is acting up. But yeah, so it did feel very much like they were very in love, even though it was a shorter period of time, as I would expect love to mature, but it did read as they were very, very much in love. So it feels a bit shit to me that Oliver didn't say anything. So yeah. And there were parts about a peach. If you read the book, you would know about it. There's a part about a peach that an apricot that I'm a bit like, about, but I get it. I get what the author's trying to do, so it's fine. It's just out of my web of reference. I don't know how to say it. I don't know how to say it without ruining it. But like, there's a lot about human intimacy. And it's not just about sex, all right? There's a lot of human intimacy. Human intimacy. But it was a beautiful book. One of the best romances that I've read this month. Okay, the last book I read is The Hating Game. I had very, very high hopes for this, because I know Lucy Hale is doing a movie on it soon, and I love Lucy's movie, even though it's like, a lot of them is quite like cheesy, romantic stuff. Like, I do enjoy it. I do quite enjoy it. But I mainly picked this book up because it was Noelle's favorite book, and she talks about it a lot on her channel, so I was like, okay, I'm gonna give it a try, because it sounds like a good ass book. I gave it 2 out of 5 stars, would have been 1 again, and no, I'm gonna keep it at 2. It's not gonna be like a switch thing with Jane Eyre, right? But like, it was a 2-star because it was a good palate cleanser. I feel like it's quite light, like how a chick flick would be like, but I don't think I enjoy reading chick flicks that much. It was just very predictable. Like right from the beginning, I knew they were gonna fall in love, and that's honestly okay. I still do enjoy seeing how stories pan out sometimes, but I just guessed everything that was gonna happen. Every single twist I guessed. Every single, how it would end, I guess, right? Like, I think the biggest plot twist, or the sweetest thing that he does for her, I guessed. Yeah, so we basically follow these 2 characters right here on the front page. She loves strawberries, she loves Smurfs, he loves her, she loves him. And basically, they are both they're both assistants to co-CEOs of a publishing company, and they hate each other. That's about it. That's all I can tell you without spoiling the story. But 2 out of 5 for me, honestly. I'm excited to see what the movie is like. But I just didn't enjoy reading the book. And that is all, my friends. I will see you guys in my next video. I hope you enjoyed this kind of makeshift backdrop that I made. Let me know what you guys think. So I'm gonna stop talking now because my wisdom tooth hurts like shit. So I will see you guys in my next video. I can't even kiss you properly. Can I be with you? Let me take the fall.